So I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's program, Discover Gap Years. Our wonderful presenter is Katherine Stievater. She is with the Gap Year Solutions Company. It's her own company. She's been doing this she's in her 8th year of advising families and students on different gap year opportunities. And so she's got a wealth of knowledge. She is so happy to answer questions. So please make sure you ask questions at the end or during the program in the chat box. And with that, I'm going to turn it right over to Katherine because she always has a ton to say.
Thank you so much, Susan. And it's so great to have everybody here. I wish I could be in person out there. I'm calling from Boston, Massachusetts, 7 degrees here, and just great to be with all. Quick thing, either you can put in the chat and then Susan, feel free to interrupt. I would love to know just quickly what age group, whether you're a student, if you're a parent of a certain age student, if you could just maybe put that in the chat or unmute yourself for a second and just let me know. That way I can sort of gear the talk a little bit more to who's on the call tonight, if you want to do that. I'm going to start, but Susan, just interrupt me and just let me know who's on if you want to do that.
Yeah, mostly it looks like it's parents of juniors.
Okay, great. Okay, so other than I'm an accredited gap year advisor, and for all of you who are on the call who have no idea what my job is, I'm very similar to what a college counselor is. College counselors actually help students figure out the college process. I work with students to help them figure out the gap year process. And yes, there is a process. It just doesn't appear, it doesn't happen. It has to be, really something that a student is choosing. And I will say that, if you're mostly juniors, it's great that you're here to kind of start thinking about it, planting the seed, as well as being gap year advisor. Gone through the process of the college process many times. My oldest son on the right there, he actually spent his junior year of high school in Spain. He lived with a host family. He took all of his classes in Spanish. I still actually can't believe I let him do it when he was 16. But it was the time of his life. He really immersed in a different culture, and it just gave him such a different world perspective when he came back to the States. My second son, there on the left of me, I actually always smile when I talk about him because his life, because of his gap year, he took a gap year, he chose to take a gap year, changed his life. It put him on a different path forever. As a mom, when he was in 10th grade, I thought that a gap year might be a good opportunity for him, and he wanted no part of it. And then by the time he was a senior, he actually had ended up by getting into a couple of colleges early. And he came to me and said, listen, I want to take a gap year. And it was I was so excited as a mom and as a gap year advisor. And I asked him, so what are you going to do? He goes, I'm just going to backpack around Europe. And I'm like, okay, so that wouldn't work too well because you have never even traveled by yourself. You need the life skills, and there's, risk management and safety and learning how to travel. So he ended up by working a ton, and he helped pay for a structured program. He did some volunteer work throughout his year. And by the time he finished his gap year at the end of August, he said, I'm excited. I have fire in my belly. I'm excited to study again. He was burned out in high school. So when I think about him now, he's a senior in college. Because of COVID, he took 2 different gap semesters because he felt like, I'm on my own path. And to me, what I want to get across tonight is if you do choose to take a gap year, you choose at 18, you have the courage to do that. My son and all these kids that have done this feel like they're doing this because it's right for them. So making decisions later in life is just easier for them, not having to follow the herd, which I think is priceless. Let's jump to my third kid, who's actually 6'6". He's a huge on the left there. He is a freshman in college, and he just decided, honestly, a week before he was supposed to fly back to where he was going to school, to take a gap semester. I'm super thrilled for that as well. And it's just great to understand that, he realized that there's no other time that he can actually have this opportunity he wanted to travel. And speaking to his brother, who had taken a gap year this holiday season, he said, going abroad in college, you have your professors, your projects, your classes, but when you travel in a gap year, you have no academic commitment. So I'm thrilled. He will be traveling actually also in Spain for this semester. And he's excited to do that. It was a big choice for him though, to not go back to university. And then I also have a junior in high school. So I am a junior parent as well. And it's, going to get through this and just enjoy the process. So we're not here to talk about college at the moment. We're here to talk about gap years. So tonight, this is really what I want to talk about. I want to give you a really simple definition of a gap year. And I could talk all night about the benefits, but I'll limit it to a few. And then what are the myths? I'm sure most of you on the Zoom tonight have heard of like why you wouldn't want to do a gap year and some of the misconceptions, and we'll go over those. And then the big question is, how do you structure a gap year? Like it could be this big overwhelming, like, oh, you know what, we just get into college, I can't even think about a gap year. I'll give you a couple of easy ways to help structure a gap year. And then how does it relate to the college process? There is a process for a gap year, a successful gap year. So let's get started. What is a gap year? And my really simple definition is it's an intentional time off from traditional academic studies. And I have intentional underlined because it has to be intentional. A student must choose to take a gap year. The parents can't choose it. The grandma can't choose it. Their teachers can't choose it. A student needs to make this choice. And it really has to be an active choice. When I say that, I'm thinking versus a passive choice, right? So an active choice, meaning you don't just end up by deciding not to apply to college and then you're figuring out what you're doing throughout that year and you don't know what you're doing. So I guess you're on a gap year. The most successful gap year is a gap year with a plan. A gap year can be a gap semester or it can be a year. There's no set time. Again, it's so incredibly individual, just like how, individual every student is. And why are students taking gap years? Burnout is huge. And basically, some students have always wanted to take a gap year, so they're going to do this. Other students literally have no idea why they're going to college. The students that they know they want to go, but they have no idea why or what they're going to study. Other students just don't know if they're ready. They don't know if they can hack it yet. So there's no one reason why students are choosing this. But to let you know, before COVID, gap years are becoming more popular. And I love this slide because I wish I could talk to and see the students, and if there's any on, and say, who feels like this? What student feels like this? And I will say, what parent feels like this? I kind of feel like, this is like a hamster wheel. And it's almost like these students are on a race. And what's the end? What is the end of this race? And for many students, the end of the race is college. It's really hard to step off this path when your goal is to go to college. By the time you're a senior, you will have been in school for 13 years, be it, online or whatever the last 2 years, but it's a long time and you're getting good at academics. But there's a lot of things that maybe you're not good at yet that you could really improve before you get to college. One of the things that has really been increasing, and I'm sure you all are not, you're familiar with it, is really anxiety and mental health. I think it's really, really increased. And, you think about it, I have this slide up here. If anyone's familiar with the UCLA freshman survey, it's been going on since the 1960s. And for 50 years, they've asked the exact same question. What's the percentage of entering college first years reporting feeling frequently depressed? And if you look at 2012, 13, 14, there's an increase, right? And that's when social media hit. That's when the iPhones and all of that. And we as parents, we didn't have to deal with that. This has been a huge, huge pressure for students. I don't have this, the data up till 2019 and 20, because a lot of colleges didn't even submit the data because they were all online. And I think about this path of depression. You'll go visit colleges. A lot of colleges now will show you their wellness centers, which is amazing. I'm so happy they have them. Years ago, they would show you the career center. So, I think that it's really important for us to say, what can we do? Like, how can we actually, how can we pause and what should we do? Knowing that this is happening, honestly, the majority of students will still go to college because it's easy and that's all they know and they feel comfortable doing that, even if their student or if you as a student may not feel like you're ready. And this is what colleges are saying. So there's about 4,000 colleges in the US, and this on the average, these are statistical averages. Up to 33% of freshmen will not return after sophomore year. And out of those, again, this is an average.
Want to go outside?
Only 59% of these students will ever graduate. I'm just going to interrupt. If everybody could put themselves on mute, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so only 59% will ever graduate. And I'm just going to put someone on mute here. Does anyone know the number of years the average graduation rate is? How many years? And if you would raise your hand, you would probably say 6. That's horrible. So just take a look at the slide. It's pretty unbelievable that this is really the average of the U.S., all of the U.S. students in our country. What's happening here? And do we ask ourselves, why are freshmen washing out? And what can we do? What's our answer? What are we doing? And my answer would be, just take a pause, right? Just pause. There's no rush to get to college. And by pausing, I mean a gap year, right? So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of a gap year. I don't even have a bubble about this one because the number one benefit, 100%, would be maturity. This teenage brain is not nearly mature. We know the studies now say it keeps getting older, but I think it's 25 to 26-year-olds is when your brain is finally mature. I say, looking at my 4 boys, I will say that I'm like the frontal lobe of my 4 boys. Walking around as their frontal lobe and their executive functioning skills. But in all seriousness, a student's brain will mature throughout this gap year. I do talk a lot about the well-being of students. I think COVID has really affected a lot of students, whether they've been online for a long time. My own students living in a public school outside of the Boston area they were only in school for 2 weeks in a year and a half in their classroom. I saw it personally with my own kids, but students across the country that I've worked with, they missed out on a lot. They missed out on those, adulting skills. The idea of being the captain of a team, or getting the lead into play, or just hanging out with kids, or having a job. So I think it's so important that we make sure that when you go as a student, or when your son or daughter goes, that they're well, that they're mentally well, they're socially well, they're physically well, they're emotionally well, because there's no parents on campus. And making sure these kids have the tools to navigate what's going to make them feel good, how are they going to cope, what are their coping mechanisms, and understanding that this is a great time for them to own it and to feel good. I would say, when these kids are in high school, we as parents, and it's our job, we're helping them make decisions. Coaches help them make decisions. Teachers are helping them make decisions. They haven't really had a huge amount of time to make their own decisions. So when I think of a benefit of the gap year, 100% is these kids finally get to make decisions, and they get to problem solve. I would say, and one of the number one things that kids just have the hardest time doing is problem solving on a college campus. The Princeton survey came up with a great statistic. I think it was about 2.5 years ago now. The number one reason kids drop out of college is lack of non-academic skills. So they have the academics for sure, but they don't necessarily have the life skills that they need. So, think about, I think about the life skills. My son went to college. He had already learned how to do laundry and cook and all of that during his gap year. And he called home saying, "Mom, I don't get it. Some of these freshmen have no clue how to do laundry." And I'm thinking, that would have been you if you hadn't taken a gap year, right? I mean, he hadn't done his laundry before. So really learning to become independent, those basic life skills, learning what it's like to budget, learning what it's like a lot of kids are getting driver's license, or they're getting a job for the first time. They're taking care of themselves, their health. It's really something that we take for granted. When I was in high school years ago, there was a home ec class. There was a how to change the tire class. They don't have those classes anymore. And I think the biggest thing that I work with my students when I'm working with them is, how do you network? That is probably the number one skill that I think that we need, and we need to teach our students. They're going to get their jobs not through the paper or necessarily through the internet, but networking. Who do you know? And there's no time to teach that in high school or in college. So I think some basic skills, and these aren't skills just to get them from this year between high school and college. These are just life skills that they can have. The other thing is, and I love this one, is, when kids are in high school, they have labels. Are they the athlete? Are they the nerd? Are they the one that, I don't know, like the crazy one? There's labels. The cool thing about a gap year, no labels. You start this year or this semester, however long you're going to choose to do this, with a clean slate. Nobody knows you, and you can be the true self. A lot of students will apply to college first, which is what I suggest. Get into a great school. They're so excited. They get their sweatshirt. And I always say, who's the kid underneath the name of that college on your sweatshirt? You're more than Colby or Cornell or Northwestern or whatever college you're going to. Who are you? It's such a great time to discover who you are. A gap year to me is like personal growth. Literally, they grow as a person, understand who you are and who you want to be. And college focus is huge. The reason why colleges like gap year students more and more and more across the country want gap year students is because they know when they get to college, first of all, they're a year older. They're more engaged. They tend to be more leaders on campus. They will graduate with a higher GPA. And guess what? On average in 4 years, not the average 6. And they're hungry. They're ready to study. And that's what I hear all day long from my students, that, you know what, I got fire in my belly now. I'm excited to get on that hamster wheel for another 4 years. But a lot of kids just don't have the excitement. They know they're going to college because that's just what they're supposed to do, but they haven't thought about why they're going. So, I mean, again, there's so many benefits, but there's also, you know, misconceptions about gap years for sure. And I want to talk about a few of those. So by far, the number one myth that I hear about from certainly parents is, you know what, college is so expensive right now. I can't even imagine, like, we can't afford a gap year. And if you learn anything tonight, understand that a gap year costs what you can afford. Any person can take a gap year. There are some students that choose to work that never had a job and they're working to actually help pay for college. There are other students that, you know, my son included, wanted to take a structured program and work to actually help pay for that. I try to have most of my students actually work. I think it's great to have skin in the game, to feel like whether you're helping to pay for some class or some certification or some travel or whatever it is that you're doing in your gap year, putting some skin in the game, I think is great. The student here, she makes me smile every time I look at her, because in her gap year, she was going to be traveling to Latin America for her second semester. And her first semester, she took a community college class because she wanted to brush up on her English. And she was in the theater. So every afternoon she had theater practice. She had nothing going on in the morning. So I said, okay, let's get a job. What about a job? And she looked at me like I had 4 heads because she's never had a job before. And her mother said, oh my gosh, no way. She could never get a job in the morning. I had to drag her out of bed every single morning in high school. She'd be late for a job. Well, I have to say that she literally got herself up. She opened up the coffee shop 3 mornings, 6 a.m. And her boss said by far she was the best employee. And I think that's the case because, you know what? She felt like she had a purpose. Her parents didn't make her go. She had no teachers making her go. She wanted to go because she wanted to go. And she met the customers and they knew her and she felt like she had a purpose. Like she knew that she was helping others and she loved it. So when I debriefed my students at the end of their year, she said Latin America was amazing. But she goes, can you believe the first 3 weeks I was missing my colleagues at work? And one of my favorite parts of my gap year was actually working. So again, I say this because jobs, it's great for things for people to do and find different types of opportunities that, you know, you never thought you might want to do. And you don't have to feel like it has to cost a lot. If someone wants to do a structured program, if you sign up early enough, some of them have scholarships to help fund those. Okay. I get this all the time. I'm just not that travel and adventure kid and I don't want to travel. Well, guess what? You don't have to. And there's many, many students that, I mean, I like it when students maybe leave their little town a little bit, get outside of their bubble, but you don't have to. The student at the top left here, he had started a sneaker company when he was in high school. He just dabbled in it. And he said, you know, in my gap year, I want to see if this is viable. Can I make this work? And he certainly did. He ended up by moving to New York City. He lived in Connecticut, so right above, you know, right across the border. And he took a community college class and he worked in this company and it's really successful. He ended up by moving to LA. The student in the bottom left, he had 3 different internships, all 3 different types of companies. He just wanted to know, give himself an idea of what he liked and what he didn't like. I think that's a huge, like really, really great idea in your gap year. I always have students do something that they have never done before, get out of their comfort zone. And the student in the bottom right, again, he actually didn't apply to college in his senior year. He said to me, I have no idea what I want to do. So how would I possibly know what college to apply to? And he had a point for sure. So he said when he was in high school, he was a Boy Scout and he said there was an EMT guy that came in that sounded really interesting to him. And I said, so why don't you take an EMT class and see if you like it? So he ended up by taking an EMT class. He got certified for an EMT And halfway through that, he said, I know what I want to do. I want to go to nursing school. So he actually applied to 5 nursing schools. He got into all 5, and he was able to work part-time as an EMT to help pay for college. So he's like on cloud 9. He's like, if I hadn't taken a gap year, I never would have known that. So again, you don't have to travel to have a really, really successful gap year. For any students on the call, my own kids thought it was pretty cool knowing what FOMO was, but fear of missing out, it's real. And I get that for students. They want to make sure that they're going to be graduating from high school, and then they're going to graduate from college the same year that their friends graduate. And if you look at if you remember the slide from, 3 slides earlier, the average number of years is 6 years. A lot of students take a semester off, they'll take a year off. And now with COVID, it's kind of shot that to pieces. It's not the 4-year straight path at all. So basically what I tell students, when I work with them, I have their plans set. So when their friends are going off to college, they have their gap year plan. So it's a great idea to make sure whatever you're planning, that it starts. So these kids have something to look forward to. They have to have their eye on their next adventure, their next experience, whatever it is they're doing. And I have to say, I've never had a student that said, worst year, I wish I never had done it. It's always the opposite. What I hear regrets is parents and students saying, you know what, I knew that my son or daughter really wanted to do this, but I wasn't gung-ho for it. Or students that say, I wish that I had done it. And that's the truth. I've never had a student say that was the worst decision of my life. What I'm hearing from students when I touch base with them when they're in college is, I go in my freshman dorm and all of my friends are just sort of envious that I did something pretty cool. And these students own what they did. I always say that students that take a gap year, not only have they matured more, they've grown more. And I really mean that, because they stand up taller, they feel confident, and they feel like they can be independent. And it's amazing. But it does take courage, right? Think of the hamster wheel. Can you take a step off that and not do and follow the herd? Not do what the herd does, just do what's good for you. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And finally, the last thing, the myth I'll talk about tonight is I'm just not that gap year kid. And these are past students. Every single student's different. And I purposely put different students up there because there's no set gap year kid. Anyone can do this. And I personally think that every single student could benefit from this year off. There's no rush to get to college. There's no penalty if you go when you're 19 or 20. And, Europeans, there's, 30 to 35% of Europeans take a gap year. It's not like, should I? It's like, what should I do? Australians, it's like 95% of Australians will take a gap year. So I do say that, again, getting out of your comfort zone is super important. I think it's feel like you try something that you never thought you'd try before, and you feel good about yourself. And, honestly, it's probably harder to take a gap year than it is to go to college, right? Because you go to college, you know where you're living, you know what you're eating, you know what classes you're taking. In that sense, a little bit similar to high school, other than all the freedom that you have. And I always say to students and parents, when you're in high school, your day is about 6 hours a day, right? When you're in college, your requirements are about 12 hours a week. So I just want to make sure that when kids go, they're able to say, I want to commit to this club. I want to really get engaged in campus. So when you go to college, you have one chance of being a freshman, right? So just make sure it's the right time for you. It's not a vacation. Getting up in the morning in September, getting up around 10 or 11, hanging out with your phone, doing some video games. Yeah, mom, I'll figure it out. I'll figure out what I'm doing next week, tomorrow. It doesn't happen. It's hard. It's not sleeping in. That is a vacation. Having a plan and committing to it is really important for a gap year student. Okay. And this is really what you're all probably here for tonight. What can you possibly do in a gap year? And again, every single gap year is different, but I sort of put these in a beehive, place here, because I wanted just to show you what the most of students do in some areas. So work and internships, service and volunteer, language and cultural immersion, travel and adventure, marine life, farming and wildlife, arts and music, dance, culinary, and within each one of these little beehives, there's about 100 options or more. So this is the majority of what students do. And again, you don't have to do any of these, but people always say, like, what does the basic student do? So that's that. And then we'll talk about different experiences here. So for all of you who do not know what a structured gap year program is, I'm going to run through it really quickly. people will say, well, that sounds like a camp program. It's not. So a camp, high school camp, it's very structured. They'll say, everyone follow me to a degree, and you're not going to get very much independent time. Study abroad in college, they're for 20-year-olds, right? So these kids have already been in college for 2 years. So there is more independence. When you think about a gap year structured program, they started for the 18 to 21-year-olds. So students that mostly are they're 18, 19, and 20-year-olds that want to learn to travel, but they've never traveled on their own. Some kids may have traveled with their parents, but never have really done it. So the idea of learning what risk, safety, making sure that they understand language immersion or cultural immersion, currency, visas, passports, and really how to take care of themselves. If they're sick, what do they do, right? Like, there's so much that we take for granted as parents, saying, oh yeah, my son or daughter can travel, they're fine, but are they? Now, especially with COVID, there was so many requirements, and still are, with protocols and the quarantine and all of that, that structured programs were more popular this past couple of years than they ever were before. So these structured programs, again, they range from, there's so many different programs, and they basically, they all have their own niche, whether it's marine life or whether it's permaculture, whether it's ecology, whether it's, cooking or theater. They all have their own niche. A lot of them have leadership opportunities within them. They're going to learn to live with 10 or 12 students. There's 2 leaders, learning, conflicts. What if you don't necessarily like who you're living with, dealing with that. So all these life skills, like people skills, social skills that they may or may not have had in high school, understanding what it's like to be the leader of a group. So when you really get to college, my own son said it didn't matter what his roommate was, who it was, because he was so used to living with other different students that he goes, I could live with a wall. It doesn't matter. So the little things that a lot of people get nervous about for college, roommates, am I going to like my dorm and all of that. So a lot of these gap year students, it doesn't matter to them because they've had different life, different experiences, whether it's in the US or abroad, just travel experiences with others. So then there's other programs that aren't as structured. The woman at the top there, she was trying to decide if she wanted to be a veterinarian. So she went to South Africa and she worked at a baboon and monkey sanctuary. And she was having a heyday, as you can see. And she is now going to veterinarian school. She wanted to see, do I want to do this? Should I major in this? Should I do, what do I want to do after I graduate from college? There's also a lot of medical internships. A lot of the internships are broad. We have to be careful with COVID. So they're not, some of these pictures were before COVID, but the world is opening up a little bit more now. I have students that have started their own companies. I've had students that work on political campaigns, students with internships. There's just so many different opportunities. It's literally making sure that your student has a creative plan. And the plan has to be their interests and their goals, and revisiting those interests. Am I taking off my interests and what I wanted to get out of this gap year, and just understanding that and always visiting that. The idea of gap year internships, the word internships, for any of you who have college kids or don't have college kids, it's like the buzzword. A lot of it used to be you'd get your junior year internship in college, and then that might turn into a full-time job. Well, now a lot of students actually have internships in high school, and it's just a great way to learn how to dip your toes into some field that you don't know much about, but you can learn about. And it's a great way to experiment with. I think, for instance, I had a student that thought, as a middle school kid, I want to be an investment banker. So he actually was able to get an investment bank job for an 18-year-old. So I can't imagine what he was doing. His dad had gotten him the job, networked with his dad, right? And after 12 weeks, I said, so how did that go? He goes, I don't want to be an investment banker. It's not really what I thought it was. And I don't know what he was actually doing, but it's an opportunity for him to just kind of dive a little bit deeper than what he thought it was going to be. And, I normally with my students, I always say network. Talk to your dad, talk to your neighbors, talk to your grandparents, where do they live? But it's not super easy to find an internship for gap year. So this past year, I actually started with my own company, helping students find gap year internships and understanding, again, have a couple of options. Dive into something that you never thought you would do before and see if you like it, or if you don't. You basically have the opportunity of working with a boss that many kids may have not had before. So how do you possibly figure this out as far as structuring a gap year? And what I do is I consider it like a college year. So first semester, some experiences, and I say home for the holidays, meaning if you're home, just take a break, put your shoulders down, relax with your family, visit your friends that went to college. And then second semester, different experiences. So I put a couple of examples up here. So the first student, he got certified as a lifeguard, and then he did woofing. If you're familiar with that, it's working on an organic farm. So the students work, and anyone can work, doesn't have to be a student, 4 to 5 hours a day, and they get free room and board. So they're all over the country and they're all over the world. And it's a really, really affordable way to see, to see a different area. Students will, go to France, then go to Italy, and it's a great way to see a country, different countries. So this student did that in Western Mass. He worked at a maple syrup farm. He actually liked it so much that he goes, I'm going to do this in California. So then he worked at a winery and loved it. So, and then went off to college. Just a great experience. Didn't cost anything. He actually made money. The second student, I think he did so many different things. He worked for a political campaign for through the end of November. And then he worked at Starbucks, and he said, boy, Starbucks is really hard. Like he had appreciation. He had never worked before. So it was his first job. And he also taught skiing to students. So he had that downtime. He also said, I hadn't picked out a book to read for myself since middle school because high school was so stressful that all I could do was read what they told me to read. So he enjoyed reading. He enjoyed photography, and he made enough cash to help pay for his room and board when he hiked the Appalachian Trail. So if you think of all those different experiences he had, he was a different person. When he stepped on a college campus, he had so many experiences that he was so much more worldly. Yet he didn't leave our country, but he had so many experiences of just meeting people and talking to people and just not having to deal with academics. And I think that's a big thing for a lot of students. Some students will take a community college class, but so many won't, and they just want to learn. There's so much experiential learning that happens in a gap year that they just are more eager and excited to study when they go back to college. So travel, obviously, during COVID has had its ups and downs. I was incredibly impressed to the height of COVID that there were companies that were still open and running. I had students in Israel, I had students in Ireland, students in Thailand, and now Europe. There's programs in Spain and Italy, and programs are running now with really, really safe protocols, working with their governments to make sure things are safe. They're not going to go if they're going to hinder any people wanting to make sure that it's ethical. I'm really keen on that when I'm working with programs and helping students figure out travel. Central America, Costa Rica had been open the whole time. And just there's different parts of the world now. I mean, I get emails all the time. What's not working, what's working. New Zealand and Australia always has been a top player for gap year students, and many reasons. First of all, obviously English speaking, but they can work there. It's really far away, so they can spend a lot of time there. But guess what? It's not happening right now. And so unfortunately, it will open at some point, but it's not going to be for a while. So how does the gap year process work with the college planning process? So if you all are mostly juniors on the call tonight, get ready for next year. So, first semester, it's the college planning semester. So September through January, you're going to be writing your applications and submitting them. And then December through March, you'll be receiving your admissions decisions. If you apply early action or early decision, you may hear before the holidays. Some schools are coming out in December, other ones are starting in January. And then by May 1st, that's the deadline to accept your college enrollment. It's a big date. And at that point, how does that overlap with the gap year research planning process? I always say when I speak at schools, I'll say, just start thinking about the gap year freshman year. But certainly by junior year, is this something that you could possibly see yourself doing? So you can dream, think about it. Like, what would you want to do? And what you want to do when you're a junior is probably something very different in the middle of your senior year, right? You're a teen, or teens change. It's like the wind, right? Like I think of someone will say something one day and 2 weeks later, there's something different. So just dreaming and think about the possibilities. So I don't bother students when they're trying to get their college applications in. Again, I stress that I really do suggest that students go through the college process. If they're choosing to go to college after high school, go through that process as a senior with your peers. You have your guidance officers there to help you. You have your teacher recommendations, and you also have your peers who are kind of going through the process. And then you can go through it, you can push go. If you don't get into a college of your choice, you know what, that's okay. You can reapply in your gap year. Or if you do get into a college of your choice, you can make sure that the college actually offers deferments. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Every single school has a date for their deferment that you must research and understand. And again, I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I start, once their college applications are in, that's fun. That's when it's time to let's start planning really what you want to do for your fall semester at least. So by the time the students graduate from high school, they have a plan. They know what they're doing. Many students will start their gap year in September. Some might start in the summer. A lot of students want to graduate, have their whatever their typical summer plans are, and then just start going and head off on your gap year when your friends head off to college. So it's really a fairly easy process, but it is a process. It can't just happen in September. I don't suggest that because you don't want to miss a week or two. I want these kids to be really feeling like they're productive and they have a purpose of why they're doing this. So let's talk about the deferral process just quickly. If it seems like most of you all are juniors, I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but I always say to juniors or seniors, call up the admissions office, ask them, do they accept gap years? Many more schools are actually putting it on their websites, but not all. So understand, can I get a deferment? Every single college has a different policy. My goal in 10 years is to say on their website, are you a freshman? Are you a transfer? Are you a gap year student? And maybe we'll get there, but right now we're not there yet. So understand what they're going to ask for. Some of them have dates that are June 1st or July 1st if you want to choose to take a gap year. And how do you take a gap year? What do they do? Most schools will say, send us an email of what your plan is. They want to offer this to students that they know they're going to come back as a better student. Why should they offer or grant you a gap year? What are you going to be doing in your gap year? And your answer will be, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and I will be a stronger student for your community when I come back. I've never had a student that's not been granted a gap year. And again, the majority of schools love gap year students because when you think about it, when they graduate, they're going to be a year older when they start. And then I have to say, companies love gap year students because when you apply to a job after you graduate and you're a senior, you're a year older. And your story is going to be very different than if you just went for 4 years. Employers love gap year students as well. I know for a fact that the UC schools love gap year students, but you have to apply again in your gap year. They do not accept deferrals. And there's a handful of schools, I know Temple University, for instance, and there's other, some other private schools that don't accept gap years, but in general, 4% of schools will accept gap year students, but have the student make the phone call. Because if you really do want to take a gap year, you want to make sure the college that you're applying to also will accept them. And finally, I know I've talked a lot right now, but I get the question all the time, what does the gap year advisor do? And basically, I answer a lot of questions. And I really want to understand, and I want the student to understand what are their interests and what are their goals? What's their budget? And why are they taking a gap year? Really diving deep with the student, I think, is really important. I help them develop, a customized plan. There's no two gap year plans that are alike, just like there's no two students that are alike. Whether they want to do a program, whether they want to travel independently, or just do an independent type of experience. Again, it doesn't have to be travel. And I spend a lot of my time vetting programs. I get my feet in the ground as much as I possibly can. I have to say, in 2 years, I haven't traveled. I finally got to travel in, let's say, the end of November. And I visited 4 programs. And when I travel, I am a gapper. I've learned to surf in Ireland. I've been up into mud, up to the bottoms of my shorts, weeding and working and with, farming with these students. In November, I think I met over 60 kids, interviewed every single one of them. Why are you doing this? Do you like it? How's the program? How are the leaders? I'm really vetting these programs because a lot of programs look amazing on the website. And that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. If I can't get to every program, I have I'm just wanting to make sure I vet them with a huge list of questions to make sure they're safe. My number one priority is safety and mental health, really, for these students. And finally, I never really thought about myself this way, but I guess years ago, someone said, Katherine, you're kind of like my coach and my mentor. And I think the reason of that is I have 4 kids of my own. I am my students, I am their mentor, but I'm not their parent. And I think a lot of 18-year-olds love their parents, but maybe they're a little sick of them and they want to fly. I think the most important thing about gap years is the students in the driver's seat. This is the students' gap year. And I want to emphasize that. The parents are in the back seat. You know, that I feel like parents always say, I really want Johnny to do this, or I want my daughter to do this. And I'll say, well, what does your daughter want to do? You know, and making sure that these kids get ownership, because the more they get ownership, the more successful their gap year is going to be. So this is my information. I don't know if Susan, if you want to just stick maybe my I don't know, my email in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions going forward. If you have them tonight, we can open up your mics now. But I'm happy to answer any questions throughout. So shoot me an email if you ever have any more questions, if you can't think of it tonight. I will say, you know, especially if you're juniors, there's a lot of colleges out there, and we as parents spend a lot of time, you know, making sure that our son or daughter goes to the right fit school, their GPA works there, the size of the school, the majors, part of the country, urban, suburban. There's so many options for colleges, and they will be the best version of themselves if they go when it's the right time. So they might get into their great school, but is it the right time to go? You know, and really, what's the rush? My son says all the time that his gap year is the gift that keeps on giving. He is where he is. He has the job he has. It was at the top of his resume. And no joke, every time we would have an interview for an internship or a college or a real job, like a real job, the first thing he was asked is, what's doing your gap year? Right. So again, Susan, I could talk forever, but I'm going to stop, and happy to answer, you know, any questions that you may have.
I would like to go on a gap year.
Okay, me too. We'll go together.
Does anybody have any questions for Katherine? Feel free to unmic yourself or type it in the chat, however you feel most comfortable, but she's happy to answer questions, or if you have any comments even, we're welcome to take them now.
Don't be shy.
Katherine, where are a lot of your students right now that you're working with? Where are they? Where do you see most of them going right now in terms of the travel?
Everywhere, honestly. A lot of Europe, you know, a little bit in Asia, I guess more Europe, Asia, and South, Central America, Central Caribbean, United States. I think one of the best things that has happened like years ago when I first started doing this, I had said, why aren't there more programs? You know, why isn't there more travel in the United States? We have a beautiful country, and there's so many cultures in our country. COVID silver lining is a lot of these programs did have to pivot. You know, there was a handful of programs again in Ireland or Israel or something, but all the big programs pivoted to the US, and guess what? They're still running. And there's some fabulous programs, and these students are just having an amazing time seeing and understanding their own cultures in their own country. So a lot of US students traveling right now.
That's good. Well, thank you so much. If no one has any questions, I think that will wrap it up tonight. As always, you've been very informative and very helpful, and I hope that you've inspired at least one or two students to consider a gap year next year.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Katherine. Have a good night.